On the cloud. There we go. All right. Well, again, welcome to the November. My goodness, it is November 2021 Hawk meeting, and we're in for a treat with Carol Buie-Jackson. Wanted to welcome all of you for attending this evening. Hopefully, you all went and voted, did the early voting. Are you able to hear me okay, Carol?
Yes.
Super. All right. Well, for all of you guys, I'll just restate what I had mentioned because I had forgotten to hit the record button. But I'm the president of North Carolina Wildlife Federation's Matthews chapter. My name is Daniel Jacobowitz. I have got the esteemed pleasure of having introduced to you Carol Buie-Jackson, who is a previous president of the Matthews chapter, as well as one of the founding members nearly 16 years ago. She's a master composter, master naturalist. She's on the board of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, as well as on the board of the National Wildlife Federation. Carol, you're, if I remember correctly, one of the first females or the first female on the board of North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Is that right? And I can't hear you.
Hang on. Yes, I was the first female chair, and so far the only one. So we've got big things. I'm hoping for big things from them still, of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Yes, sir. But I wasn't the first on the board. There were other women on the board whenever I joined.
All right. So the first female chair.
Correct.
I gotcha. All right. Well, we are in for a treat. And Carol's going to talk about leaving the leaves. You know, this time of year, you see so many bagged leaves on the side of the road, so many landscape companies sucking up leaves and removing leaves and blowing leaves, making a mess, making a whole lot of noise. We're going to talk about leaving those leaves alone, as well as a little bit on composting, and then finishing up this evening with what to do helping birds and well as wildlife over the winter. So during each of those parts, we're going to have a Q&A. So we've got a Q&A button on your screen somewhere, depending on the way you've got your screen set up. So do put your questions in the Q&A. It's much easier than in the chat session. And we look forward to answering all your questions. So please toss them in there and we'll get to them as we can. I am very honored because Carol has been a great mentor to me, not only in this position, but just in general and from an environmental standpoint. And I'm excited to have Carol go ahead and present to us this evening. She's going to show us some videos from her own garden as well. So do indeed take it away, Carol.
All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. And I think you're going to have to get, can I take the screen away from you, or do you have to give it to me?
You should be able to go ahead and
all right. Can you see me? Can everybody see me? Okay. Yep. All right. So I want to give a little commercial for our Habitat Steward training that we have coming up in the spring. And if Leslie's on board, she can give us the dates of that. But you know, this journey for me started when I got my backyard certified, and then I got in touch with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. I said, the National Wildlife Federation said you can get more training regarding creating wildlife habitat. And so I called North Carolina and I said, I want some of that training. And so that it's not hyperbole to say that really changed the direction of my life, because I ended up getting out of corporate America and trying to do this full time, which thankfully I have succeeded in. And I'm also very thankful that I've got a great husband that supports that. So the Habitat Steward training, we're doing it in the spring. I want to say it's in March. And it's going to be held in Matthews. And so if anybody is interested, please get in touch with Hawk. We're doing it in partnership with a couple of the other chapters, the Charlotte chapter, and I believe the Concord chapter too. So everybody is welcome to join, even if you don't live in Matthews. If you don't even live in Charlotte, you're still welcome to join that Habitat Steward training. So Habitat Steward training. Anyway, so our email address is hawk, HAWKNCWF@gmail.com. So if you're interested in the Habitat Steward training, send us an email with that in the subject line, Habitat Steward training, and I will, one of us will get back to you with dates and more information. So, but before I start tonight with my presentation, I used to be I am a master composter, and I used to teach the composting classes for Mecklenburg County. And I would start every class with this little parable. So I'm going to read it to you tonight. It highlights the absurdity that happens when man tries to outsmart Mother Nature. So bear with me on this one. So this is God talking to St. Francis. Frank, you know all about gardens and nature. What in the world is going on down there on the planet? What happened to the dandelions, the violets, the milkweeds, and the stuff that I started eons ago? I had a perfect no maintenance garden plan. Those plants grow in any type of soil, withstand drought, multiply with abandon. The nectar from the long-lasting blossoms attracts butterflies, honeybees, and flocks of songbirds. I expected to see a vast garden of colors by now, but all I see are these green squares. St. Francis says, it's the tribes that settled there, Lord, called the suburbanites. They started calling your flowers weeds, and they went to great lengths to kill them and replace them with grass. Grass? But that's so boring. It's not colorful. It doesn't attract butterflies, birds, and bees, only grubs and sodworms. It's sensitive to temperatures. And do these suburbanites really want all that grass growing down there? Well, apparently so, Lord. They go to great pains to grow it and to keep it green. They begin each spring by fertilizing grass and poisoning any other plant that crops up in the lawn. God says, well, the spring rains and the warm weather probably make the grass grow really fast. That must make them very happy. Well, St. Francis says, apparently not, Lord. As soon as it grows a little, they cut it, sometimes twice a week. God says, they cut it? Did they bale it like hay? No, most of them rake it up and put it in bags. Oh, they bag it, so it must be a cash crop. Do they sell it? No, just the opposite. They pay to throw it away. Now, let me get this straight. They fertilize the grass so it'll grow, and when it does grow, they cut it off and they pay to throw it away. St. Francis says, yes, sir. And God says, these suburbanites must be relieved in the summer when we cut back on the rain and turn up the heat. That surely slows the growth and saves them a lot of work. He says, well, Lord, you're not going to believe this. When the grass stops growing so fast, they drag out hoses and they pay money to water it so they can continue to mow it and then pay to get rid of it. And God says, what nonsense. At least they kept some of the trees. That was a sheer stroke of genius, if I do say so myself. The trees grow leaves in the spring to provide beauty and shade in the summer. In the autumn, they fall to the ground and form a natural blanket to keep moisture in the soil and protect the trees and the bushes. It's the natural cycle of life. St. Francis says, well, you better sit down, Lord, because the suburbanites have drawn a new circle. As soon as the leaves fall, they rake them into great piles and they pay to have them hauled away. No. What do they do to protect the shrubs and tree roots in the winter and to keep the soil moist and loose? St. Francis says, after throwing away the leaves, they go out and they buy something they call mulch. They haul it home and they spread it around in place of the leaves. And God asks, well, where do they get this mulch? And St. Francis says, they cut down the trees and they grind them up. God says, enough. I don't want to think about this anymore. St. Catherine, you're in charge of the arts. What movie have you got scheduled for us tonight? St. Francis says, Dumb and Dumber, Lord. It's a story about, and God says, never mind. I think I just heard the whole story. So again, when we try to outsmart Mother Nature, we end up causing ourselves a lot of work. We end up paying a lot of money. And in the long run, it would just be cheaper, easier, and better for everybody, including the wildlife, if we just took our cues from Mother Nature. So I'm going to start my presentation. So I'm going to share my content. Let me just make sure. All right. Share.
That was a great story, Carol. I think all of us were shaking our heads in indeed the Dumb and Dumber. That is the story.
It's almost too true to be funny, you know. All right, so hang on. All right, hang on a second here. Let me get my. Well, I had this open earlier, so. And Daniel, you let me know if you can't see my screen. It should be coming up.
Yep, it's looking good. Matter of fact, I see Leslie went ahead and
all right.
And mentions that the Habitat Steward training is happening over from the 3rd to the 6th of March at the Matthews Community Center.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, and I encourage anybody who wants to join to get in touch with us. And I think Tara may be on the call too, Tara Moore, and she can get you information as well. So her address is Tara, T-A-R-A, at ncwf.org. So leave the leaves, right? Why make all that work for yourself? So the first thing, as God and St. Francis discussed, the best part about the leaves is it's mulch. It is free mulch. You don't have to go to the store and buy it. You don't have to haul it home in bags. It's free mulch. It's free mulch to keep the weeds down, to keep the moisture in the soil. It also, as the leaves are decomposing, they're returning the nutrients that it's encased in those leaves, is returning those nutrients to the soil, which feed the same tree they fell off of. So again, it's a perfect natural cycle. It also, by not, and I know that here in Mecklenburg County, you can bag up your leaves in a proper paper bag and put it at the curb, and they will pick it up and they'll make compost out of your leaves and other yard debris that you can then purchase back from them. But if you don't bag it correctly, it's going straight to a landfill. So by keeping the leaves in your yard as free mulch, it keeps the leaves out of the landfills from taking up room, and it also doesn't when it gets in the landfill, they get matted down and they go anaerobic, which is a source of methane gas, which is a source of global warming. So by keeping them out of the landfills, you're not taking up room, and you're also not producing any methane gas. And then, as Daniel mentioned earlier, the menace in our neighborhood, those darn gas-powered leaf blowers, they contribute not only air pollution, but they contribute noise pollution as well. And it seems like you can go into some neighborhoods on the weekend and somebody's got a leaf blower going or a lawnmower going all the time. And then limited raking is great exercise. We don't want you to overdo it. We don't want you to have a heart attack out there. So we don't want you to rake all of your leaves. We just want, but if you've got an area of your lawn that you really feel like you need to get the grass off of, or get the leaves off the grass, then go ahead, rake them up. But again, put them under those bushes in the yard, put them out there under the trees, and let them do what leaves do naturally. And then, of course, the other thing that I have to mention as a master composter, it's in my contract, is compost. If you have too many leaves that you can't use it all as mulch, you can do a composting pile. There's you can do a hot batch method where you're adding nitrogen and cooking the compost, but there's another type of compost called a cold batch method, or a passive pile, where you're just kind of piling the leaves up and letting them decompose over time, and you don't have to worry about adding nitrogen to the pile to get it to cook and get to a temperature, but you're just using that down the road. Next summer in July, you'll be able to go to that leaf pile and then replenish some of the areas in your garden. So that is great reasons to leave the leaves in the yard. The most important one in my book is because those leaves provide cover and provide a food source for a huge variety of wildlife. So before we ever got here and started raking up the leaves, the wildlife here were depending on those leaves for certain things. So the amphibians and reptiles, they are counting on it for cover. Insects need it to overwinter. They also need it to go through their life cycle, like lightning bugs or fireflies, depending on where you're from. Fireflies depend on undisturbed leaf litter, and we're going to stop calling it litter. We're going to call it leaf layer because litter has such a bad connotation. They depend on the leaf layer to lay their eggs and let the eggs go through their life cycle, pupa, and emerge as adults. So one of the reasons that we don't see as many lightning bugs as we used to, especially not when I was a kid, is that we don't have a lot of undisturbed leaf layer around. If you go onto the greenways in the summertime where nobody's out there raking those by the greenways, and they're just letting it decompose naturally, the lightning bugs there are amazing. A lot of mammals are using it, like mice. And mice are not only using it for cover, but they're also using it to find food, because they know that there's insects too. We had a little deer mouse, and this is what this is, a little deer mouse, they're adorable, behind the store. And that deer mouse not only was cute as a button, but he was eating roaches. And, if you're going to eat roaches, you have a place in my world. So he was helping keep the insect population under control. Moths, they're not only using it as cover, but they're also, again, they're chrysalis. Just like a butterfly has a chrysalis, so do moths. Those chrysalis are going to overwinter in the leaf litter. And so next spring, when it gets warmer, those chrysalis are going to emerge as moths, lay eggs, and produce caterpillars. And those caterpillars are critical for the bird population. And that's a chickadee with a caterpillar right there. And the chickadee, Doug Tallamy did a study. One of his research students did a study that it takes 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of chickadees. And chickadees are really tiny birds. So imagine how many for a robin or a thrasher or some of the larger birds. 96% of the birds here in North Carolina depend on insects to feed their young. And of course, the box turtles, they're here year round, and they are hunkered down out there in the woods. When the temperature gets cold, they burrow down underneath the leaves, get into that under that leaf layer, and that's where they spend the winter, as well as other reptiles too. So if the not having to rake and the not having to drag to the curb and free mulch is not enough for you, think about all the wildlife that depends on that leaf layer. And then while we're talking about not taking stuff to the curbs and leaving a little bit more of the debris from your yard in your yard, consider a brush pile in your garden this winter. So as you're out there picking up limbs and straightening up, instead of putting those limbs out at the curb, start piling them up. Like Leslie, our vice president, she has a fabulous brush pile in her yard that is shaped like a teepee. That's the way that the branches are stacked on each other. It's my brush pile wasn't nearly as pretty, but hers is actually kind of a nice element in her yard. So you can hide it behind a bush in the back in the corner, or you can put it front and center and make yourself a nice brush pile. But a brush pile becomes a place for some larger animals like bunnies to get into. Possum will overwinter and use a brush pile for cover in the wintertime. So we're going to talk more about what to do for the wildlife in your yard during the winter. And we're going to concentrate a lot on birds, but we need to be thinking about the other animals that are out there as well. So this is an example of a brush pile. And then I think we have one more coming. This is a little bit larger brush pile. So it doesn't have to be this big to be of benefit. You can have a small little, one tucked under a bush, and it'll still be beneficial, and it becomes like its own little ecosystem. As the wood breaks down, the bugs are in there, and the birds are going in for the bugs, and the bunnies are finding shelter. So it becomes a little microcosm of your yard. So consider a brush pile. And this is my garden in Matthews. I no longer live here. That was my ugly brush pile, but it was still pretty. Whenever we would have to cut down a tree or lose a tree, we would just chop it up and stack it. Again, lots of nooks and crannies. This is a stack of rock. Lots of nooks and crannies for all sorts of wildlife. This is pottery shards, broken pottery that was hidden out there. Lots of leaf layer. As you can see, undisturbed, just let it go through its natural cycle. So, and then more reason to garden in the fall. Fall gardening rocks. It's kind of counterintuitive, but fall is the best time to plant trees, shrubs, vines, and perennials, because it is the trees can concentrate, or the plants, the shrubs, they can concentrate on getting their roots established. They don't have the stress of having to produce leaves, of having to produce blooms. Usually it's much moisture in the wintertime because the sun's not beating down on the earth 18 hours a day, or our corner of the earth. And so there's a lot less stress on the plant. And fortunately, nobody else seems to know this, so other people don't plant in the fall, and so nurseries have a lot of fall sales, so you can get a lot of plants for this, for a lot cheaper price, and still get them in the ground and enjoy them next year. So I encourage you to go to your favorite nursery. I know that Donna over at Pike's Nursery on Johnston Road, she's a huge native plant person, and she's done a great job of convincing Pikes to bring in some native plants. And I usually go over there in the fall and see what I can get, see if I can get anything on sale, in addition to the other support I give them throughout the year. So, and I want to encourage everybody to plant native. The pictures there that you see on the screen, those are all native. We consider, sometimes people don't consider native plants as being sexy. They want something that their neighbors don't have, or something they saw in a book somewhere. But our native plants are beautiful. You can, with witch hazel, those are blooming in January, February, so you can have blooms almost year round, but they are going to feed the wildlife that is here. It's going to provide food and shelter for our native wildlife. So please make sure that you are planting native whenever you plant. And then there's no way for me to tell you all the native plants. As Doug Tallamy will tell you, an oak tree is the best thing to plant. If you're going to only plant one thing, plant an oak tree, because it feeds the highest number of caterpillar species, so that those caterpillars again are little morsels of protein that are supporting a lot of other wildlife. So plants, lots of native plants. Those are two vines there, crossvine and the Carolina jessamine, that I like. And then this is a great photo. Will Stewart posted this on Facebook just today, and I texted him and I said, "Can I please use that picture?" This is most of you can see it's a dogwood. He was out in PD, I think, today, and took this picture of the bluebirds enjoying the berries on the dogwood. So another reason, the dogwoods, they start their leaves turning earlier. Of course, now all the leaves are turning. It's beautiful, but they start turning their leaves late summer, early fall, a lot before a lot of the other trees have started getting any color on them. And part of the reason is that is also kind of the start of the bird migration. And so what that dogwood is doing, it's saying, hey, it's kind of a fruit flag. It's saying, I've got food down here. So come come and enjoy my berries. And of course, the birds are getting sustenance from that. And then the dogwood tree is getting its seed strung all the way along the migration path. So it's a great wildlife tree. So that's our native dogwood and our state tree. So any questions? Before I go to the birds in winter, I wasn't sure if we should stop here and talk about any questions. So Daniel, I'm going to leave it to you. Do we have any questions in the Q&A, or do you want me to just keep right on plowing through?
I think you had such a rich amount of information there that everyone is shocked by all that data that you shared with us in such a short period of time. So we do have one question. Linda had posted, she shreds her leaves and uses them for mulch. Should I or should I not shred them?
Well, if you want to go through the process, you don't need to. A lot of people, if they're using them for compost, will shred the leaves because they will break down faster. Composters are an impatient lot. We're taking a natural process and we're speeding it up. So but for putting your leaves under your trees and bushes for the winter, you really don't need to shred. That's just one more step that I say sit on the deck and have a glass of wine instead of shredding.
That's right. I'm a big fan of being a lazy gardener personally.
I know. It took me years to figure out how to be a lazy gardener. And I'm also a pretty messy gardener. But yeah, this is a great excuse. And I can write everybody a note if they need it.
That's right. And, the good point that Donna from the Charlotte chapter, the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, she mentions that, also shredding them does indeed kill the insects and any sort of eggs that are overwintering on those leaves that fall, because there are plenty of those too that get, they're deposited on those leaves when they're nice and green, but as they fall, they need that leaf layer to overwinter and then pupate and be available for us. So yeah. I can't tell you how many bags of leaves that I get off the side of the road, and just check them. As long as it's nice and lightweight, I go ahead and toss them in my pickup, and I pile them on the areas that I'm looking to add more, naturalized areas. And there are plenty of insect larvae, particularly ladybugs. And I know a lot of folks that buy ladybugs. So they're paying for it. I'm just collecting it right off the side of the road, which is fantastic.
Yes, and Mecklenburg County will tell you that once something is at the curb, it is fair game. So you can, I used to be very picky. I would go to my neighbors that I knew didn't have dogs, and I love dogs, but that way I didn't have to worry about there being any hidden surprises in my leaves. And you can just go down the street and be very, very selective about the leaves that you want to bring home. So I agree with you. So yeah, and it was a great point about the insects. There's a lot of chrysalis in there, and even live insects that you just really give them a fighting chance too.
That's right. And the question of if they're too small to be impacted, I wouldn't want to go through that tornado if I was them going through a mower getting shredded or anything like that. It's certainly cheaper to not shred them and just gently toss them into the areas that you're wanting to naturalize. One of the things that, Carol, you didn't mention, you talked about the salamanders and the turtles and the small mammals, and of course, all the little insects and the larvae and frogs and moths and whatnot. But the one thing that you didn't mention in there that those leaves do is feeding the soil organisms. And
yes, worms and other microorganisms. Yes,
those microbes are the things that are keeping your trees healthy. All the natural and good funguses and nematodes and natural defenses with bacterias and whatnot are certainly necessary, and all those leaves make that soil all that much healthier.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that when we talk about composting and using leaves as mulch, but because how that happens partly is the earthworms that are there. You know, they come up and pull those leaves, pull that compost down into the soil, and so they are also helping break up that soil. You know, we're all as gardeners used to dealing with this hard clay that we've got here, this red dirt, and those worms bringing that leaf matter down into the soil not only makes that food available to the trees and the other microorganisms that are there, but it also helps break that up so the tree roots can spread or the shrubs can spread. So great
Indeed.
point.
You know, there's a question about pine straw as far as a type of mulch. You know, that's actually one of the best parts about planting and having a large pine tree is all the free mulch you get all year long.
Right.
You know, a nice little dusting of pine needles, particularly after a storm. Any comments about pine needles, pine straw?
Oh, no, pine needles work well. Not so much for composting. They can be acidic. But you know, a lot of our plants, our native azaleas, our native rhododendrons, they really like acidic soil. So that's okay.
You know, there was a question from Nicole. She asked about that she has a spider infestation. I'm kind of curious what types or what variety of spider, but spider infestation in her holly bushes. What can I do to combat that won't harm the bush? And I say, you don't have a spider problem. You've got a spider eating problem. So all of the things that eat spiders is what you need to attract. So there are plenty of things that will munch on spiders, all kind of spiders. But the spiders are fantastic in helping combat other little creatures that you don't want.
Yeah, and you make a great point because when a yard is out of balance or a garden is out of balance, something starts taking over a certain area, and you say, well, I need to kill that. So you take that what you consider a pest out, and then whatever that species was eating, now they're having a heyday, right? So you've kind of created another problem because you've got something else over here that doesn't have a natural predator, so it's going to town. You know, Larry Mellenchamp says every organism is trying to take over the world. So it's all about, you know, reproduction and gaining territory. And so then then you've got to go buy something that'll take care of that organism, and then whatever that organism was eating, then you're off to the races again with another species. So so trying to have a nice balanced yard, having plenty of native plants, having plenty of or less chemicals that are killing, plenty of really healthy environments for them to be in. And it may take a while, but your garden will kind of reset itself. It will find its eco balance. Does that make sense?
There's no question that, you know, all the excessive sides, you know, the CIDES, the herbicides, the pesticides, the fungicides, all of that is a problem. That's certainly what takes not only the stuff that we see, but also those soil microbes that we were talking about a moment ago.
Right. And you know, the spiders aren't eating your plant. They're living in your plant, but there's something in there that they are enjoying. There's a food source nearby of some kind. So I would let them do their thing, because they're not going to kill that plant if they are indeed spiders. So and spiders are, like you say, they're beneficial.
One thing I'll say is that if Nicole, if they happen to be writing spiders, you know, the kind that they wrote the book Charlotte's Web about so many years ago, you can feel free to reach out to me, and I'll come and get them, because I love putting them in my garden as well as my friends and my clients' gardens. So I'll come and collect those nice big yellow and black spiders. You can handle them; they move fast, but they don't harm us. So they're out there doing yes, they are spiders. All right. So if those were the if those were the kind, you feel free to reach out to hawkncwf@gmail.com, and I'll connect with you. I'll gladly come in and grab some from you.
A spider relocation program.
Yeah, no, in fact, I've collected
put that on our website.
A dozen at a time is fantastic. All right, everybody. So we are going to, if there are any other questions, don't ever hesitate. Feel free to toss in there. Carol, we're going to go ahead and go with the next topic this evening, which is the things that you can do over the winter to help the birds, right?
Yeah. So this is a presentation that I did for Winghaven last year, and it was a little bit colder at the time. So imagine, if you will, later this month or early next month. Right now, the birds are they are enjoying a lot of natural food, but soon that natural food is going to be gone. As soon as we have our first good hard freeze, protein is going to become very scarce. Right now, they've still got there's a lot of protein out there in the form of caterpillars and other insects. But protein is a big challenge in the wintertime, because the insects go dormant. And the winter residents that we get some warblers down here in the wintertime that we don't have in the summertime. We've got woodpeckers like the yellow-bellied sapsucker and the northern flicker that come down and spend the winter with us. And so they are going to be looking for protein as well. And then we get a lot of, in addition to our own ground feeding birds that are here, like thrashers and cardinals and dove, we get some new ground feeding birds down here. The juncos, which a lot of people call snowbirds because they seem to show up right around the bad weather, which is just amazing. And white-throated sparrows. White-throated sparrows, you hear them now. They're, Mr. Peabody. That's one of my favorite calls. I love to hear them show up. And I know that it's definitely fall when they are here. And then as we get closer in December, and especially as we're going to be knocking on January's door, the natural resources are going to be depleted. Most of you know that I own a couple of bird stores, and always into the fall, we always expect that the seed sales will really fall off because the birds just stop coming to feeders. They have so many berries and nuts and seeds out there that they really don't need feeders as much. They're not fighting for territory. They're not feeding young. And so they're much more relaxed. You'll probably notice in the mornings, you don't hear the birds like you do in the springtime because they just don't have any need for them. They're chill. They're taking the fall off. They're eating what nature provides for them. But as soon as it gets cold, the little beggars will be right back at your feeders. And so we're going to talk about how to provide a little bit differently for them in the wintertime. And then they also need protection from harsh weather. Again, we have taken so much of the habitat, all the trees, all the dead trees where they would find cavities to hide in, all those little hidey holes that are out there and leaf layer that people aren't leaving anymore. They're much more at risk during the harsh weather than they used to be, or if they were in a more natural area than Charlotte, North Carolina. So any protection that we can provide to them for the harsh weather, and we're going to talk about that. And then also water. A lot of people don't think about birds and water in the wintertime, but water is just as important. I mean, I bet you that Daniel drinks water every day in the winter. I'm hoping Daniel bathes every day in the winter. I know his wife is hoping he does. And water is just as important in the wintertime for birds and other wildlife, because if they can't keep themselves clean, matted fur, matted feathers, they can't regulate their body temperature. So it's very important for hygiene. And then it's also very important for hydration. They are drinking water every day. And so if it's a cold day and the waters are frozen, the water in your bird bath is frozen, the mud puddles are frozen, they are going to be looking for water sources. A lot of times a big lake is not really accessible to the smaller birds. So if you can provide some liquid water, not frozen water on those days, your backyard is going to be hopping. So I'm going to go through some of this. Feeders, like I said, the birds are going to be back at the feeders in the wintertime. The wider the variety of feeders that you have and the wider the variety of food that you offer, the wider the variety of birds that you're going to have. It's just kind of 1 + 1 = 2. It's pretty easy. So you want to, I encourage you to get a good quality food. Don't buy the stuff at Home Depot or Lowe's. It's been sitting in a warehouse for heaven knows how long, and they sell the same thing in Charlotte that they sell in San Diego, and the birds eat different things. So you really want to make sure that you're getting a good seed from a good store, preferably a good bird store. It doesn't have to be mine, but a good bird store, and that's getting seed in every week versus every few months. And because birds are just like people, not all birds eat the same thing. They all eat something different. Then you need a nice variety as well. These are hopper feeders. These are great for storing up, larger amounts of seed. It's protected from the weather. It's gravity fed. The hopper part holds the seed and then it comes out the bottom. They also normally have wider bases so that larger birds can use them. Cardinals can't use a tube feeder. They're just, unless the perches are modified for them, but just a regular standard perch on a tube bird feeder, it won't accommodate a cardinal. They're just too large to be able to turn around and eat out of the port. But a hopper feeder, or that one in the middle, is called a fly-through feeder. Those are ideal for feeding cardinals, bluebirds, some of the larger birds. The fly-through is basically just a platform feeder with a roof on it, protects it from the weather. And then the hopper feeder, as I said, has the hopper that will hold larger amounts of seed, protect it from the weather, and then it's gravity fed. And then another kind of a cool feeder, depending on what your situation is, are these seed cylinders. Seed cylinders are held together with gelatin. It's safe for the birds. And what's nice about them is for people who have smaller areas, maybe they're feeding on a balcony or they have it on their patio and they don't want the mess underneath the feeder. This is kind of cool because the birds will pick at it and they're just picking off what they're going to eat. They're not scraping it out of the feeder looking for that one juicy morsel of something. So that's a kind of a cool way to provide food. And then these are a bunch of bluebirds, and bluebirds are high protein eaters. And so in the wintertime, and we have bluebirds year round here, and the bluebirds that nested in your yard last summer and had 2 or 3 broods, that whole family, the adults and all the young, will stay together all winter, and they will come to your feeders. In next spring, they will they'll kind of, the mom and dad will say, hey, you guys got to hit the road, but you can enjoy them all winter by providing high protein foods. So sunflower chips, mealworms, and suet. And we're going to talk a little bit more about suet. So those are just different feeders for providing that. And there's a suet. Speak of the devil, there's suet right in the middle. So a suet is rendered lard. So in its truest form, there is some suet that they get the protein from peanuts, but real suet is rendered lard, and mixed into that are other things. So different companies will put fruits and berries in there. They will put ground up insects, crickets and worms in there. They'll put some millet or ground cracked corn in there. And, there's probably 20 different varieties of suet that you could buy. And I think they do the flavors more for the people buying them than they do for the birds. I'm not sure that the birds care that much. Just make sure that it has some rendered lard in there. because the rendered lard is going to be higher in protein and it's going to be higher in calories. And in the wintertime, the birds are burning through a lot of energy trying to keep themselves warm. So the higher calorie foods are important for them. So suet, and in the summertime, when you've got to worry about the heat and maybe the suet is going to melt, then you can switch to the other variety that has just that gets their protein from the peanuts. But in the wintertime, get the real, we call it the fully leaded suet, so that they have plenty of calories. And then again, these are just varieties of food. Hummingbird feeders. We do have hummingbirds here in the wintertime. In the summertime, if you see a hummingbird, it's going to be a ruby-throated hummingbird, because that's the only hummingbird that breeds here. But in the wintertime, I think there's been about 9 different species of hummingbirds that have been cataloged or recorded here in Mecklenburg County. So they're rare. And I say, be careful what you wish for, because years ago, Jay and I had a rufous hummingbird spend the winter with us, and I was a nervous wreck by the time it left, because you're having to get up in the first thing in the morning and get the feeder out before sunrise. So when the hummingbird comes out of torpidity, they have food available to them. They go into a torpid state overnight, so that they slow down their heart rate and their respiration and their metabolism, so they don't have to eat every 5 minutes. But when they come out of that, they need a quick jolt of calories. And so it was nerve-wracking to, I had 2 or 3 feeders. I'd put one out, and if it was a cold day and it froze during the day, I had to watch it and put another one out. And the bird might have survived without me. Many birds do, but I made myself a nervous wreck over it. But we actually had Bill Hilton come in and trap him and band him. And it was an immature rufous hummingbird, a male. And he left about the 1st of March. So it was a great thing, but I bring my feeder in about around Thanksgiving, and we tell people to leave your hummingbird feeder up through mid-November, because there are still, birds that are, the hummingbirds from farther north are still moving through the area. So they need to eat all the way down. So leave your feeders up, keep fresh nectar in them. But if you don't want a rufous or another type of hummingbird to spend the winter with you, you might want to take them down right around, end of November. And then that top picture is another version of a fly through. I think that might be Ernie McClaney's yard, now that I think about it, but that's a cardinal on a fly through. Cardinals by nature are ground feeders, but they will come to a platform feeder of some kind, either a fly through or a hopper feeder. This is just more pictures of suet feeders. Again, I think I've explained suet to you, but what's unique about these are the tail props. So woodpeckers, when they're pecking on a tree, they use their tails as leverage to keep themselves steady and to pound on a tree. And so the suet feeders with a tail prop are favored by woodpeckers because it gives them somewhere to put their tail. They'll use a feeder that doesn't have a tail prop, but they will go to a tail prop feeder more often than one without it. So use a suet feeder with a tail prop on it. And as we talked about earlier, native plants, this is a great way to feed your birds in the wintertime. This is a possum hall. This picture was actually taken at Daniel Stowe Botanical Gardens. I went out there for the Christmas show years ago. And what's cool about this is a type of holly. It's an ilex. It is, these berries are going to stay all winter, but as the berries freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw all winter, it turns the starches in the berries to sugars. And then when the migration starts in the spring, birds like cedar waxwings will come and just strip those berries off the trees. And most berries that spend the winter, the same thing is happening to it. And again, what that is just a good dose of energy and calories so that the birds are going to need either to stay warm or during their migration. So and the cedar waxwings, they get really active here January, February, March when they're moving through the area. Cedar waxwings are also attracted to water, especially moving water, and especially on a cold day. Again, we would just get mobbed with a flock of cedar waxwings. We had a little garden pond in our backyard that had a bubbler in it. And we'd have 40, 50 cedar waxwings out there in the water at a time. Because on a really cold day, they are looking for liquid water. So running water is a signal that the water's liquid and it's available to them. This is a cool, let me see if I can get this video to start here. There we go. So this is a northern flicker. It used to be called the yellow shafted flicker. And you see on his tail, you can see some yellow there. So this is one of the only, there's two woodpeckers that migrate, this one and the yellow-bellied sapsucker. And they see, watch this tongue. It's going to slow down here in a minute, but they're insect eaters, especially ants. So you see flickers on the ground a lot, putting that long tongue into the ground and pulling ants and other insects out of the ground. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? So, but in the winter time, especially cold days when insects may be hard to come by, when the ground might be too hard to get in there, the flicker will come to your feeders. And he was on a platform feeder and he was eating the little suet pellets that I had in there. So they're amazing birds. They're beautiful. And we only get to see them in the wintertime, which makes them special. But also that tongue, you saw that, how long that tongue went out. In a woodpecker, most of them have a tongue very similar to that. And what's cool about it is when they retract that tongue, and I wish you could see me, but it comes into their head and it wraps up around their brain. And as they're pecking on a tree, that tongue can provide cushion, bubble wrap, if you will, around their brain so that they don't get injured. So I just think that's an amazing little woodpecker trivia point. So, oh, Tara, we'll put that in our trivia night next time. So anyway, woodpeckers are fascinating. And I don't have a picture of the yellow-bellied sapsucker, but you can tell if there's a yellow-bellied sapsucker frequenting your area because they are notorious for putting that line of little holes in your tree, especially maples and especially pecans. And they do it in a straight line around the tree, all these little holes about an inch apart. And what they're doing is they're getting the sap to come out of that tree. And so when it runs down, they lap up the sap, but they also will eat the insects that come and get stuck in that sap. So again, fascinating creatures that are only here in the wintertime. So keep your eyes peeled on that. Oh, and here's another kind of a cool woodpecker feeder. And you will see the red-bellied woodpecker. And he's eating, and they're here year round. And not that they're not special, we love them. But this is a white-breasted nuthatch, and they're here year round too. But they frequent the feeders a lot more in the wintertime than they do in the summertime. In summertime, there's a lot of natural food, and they're a little bit shyer birds, so you don't see them as often. But if you keep a source of protein around in the wintertime, you will see a lot more of your white-breasted nuthatches in the wintertime. So, and there's a downy woodpecker. Again, look how he's using the post as a tail prop. So he's eating that suet. So very cool. Let's see. Oh, all right. So bear with me here. I'm going to pull up a video on the ruby crown kinglet. Shauna, one day you're going to have to show me how to get this in. So I want CTV. Hang on. It's my screen. So this is another really cool bird that we have in the wintertime that we don't have in the summertime. This is a ruby crown kinglet. Again, this is in the warbler family. So high protein eater. That's what they're going to want. Right now, this little guy is eating sunflower chips at my window feeder. And I was obsessed with this bird. I've got hours and hours of footage of that bird eating at my feeder, and you saw the little ruby crown. He'll only flare that whenever he sees another male, and every time he would bend down, he'd pick up a sunflower chip and then raise up. He would see his reflection and flare his crown. So he was adorable. And then clustering your feeders together, if you can, will help attract more birds. This is a pine warbler. A lot of people mistake pine warblers for goldfinch, but pine warblers, again, only here in the wintertime. There's female bluebird, male bluebirds. There's my there's a wood that's actually a ruby-throated, but that was the day before Thanksgiving. It was my last one. And some of these are not obviously are not winter pictures. There's goldfinch, which we have goldfinch in the winter, but they're not this pretty. Oh, there's indigo bunting. That was a rose-breasted grosbeak. Those were spring pictures. Just migrants moving through the area. Putting out fruit. This is a catbird. We have them in the summertime. But putting a piece of an apple out there, again, when all the berries have been eaten off the trees in the dead of winter, that's a really, putting out fruit is really a good thing to do. And then you saw the window feeder earlier with a ruby crown kinglet. This is, you're stuck inside. It's too cold to go outside. You want to enjoy your birds. Window feeders are a great way of doing that. There's a bluebird on the feeder eating worms. You can feed worms year round. Usually the bluebirds disappear a little bit, August, September, October. You don't see them as much, but they're back now. And so they would love a nice serving of fresh, live, juicy mealworms. You can feed the dried, but the dried aren't nearly as nutritious as the fresh. And then here's my whole bluebird family. You'll see some more coming to join here that stick around. Like I say, they'll stick together through the wintertime. You get to enjoy all the babies. You really can't tell at this point which ones are babies and which ones are the adults, but they will stay with you. And this is not a winter shot, but this is just to show you that thrashers, also big protein eaters, and they are also a big beneficiary of leaving that leaf layer out in the garden, because they scratch around like chickens and love to dine on insects. So this is a mother feeding a baby, which is not really much of a baby, as you can tell. You can hardly tell it from the adult. But protein is always appreciated. All right, I'm going back to this other video for a quick second here. Let's see, here we go. So this is, I hope we get a snow day this year. My favorite days are snow days, and birders will tell you snow days are awesome birding because there's a layer of snow on everything. The birds really flock to the feeders, pardon the pun, but they really flock to the feeders because the food is more available to them. So there's a lot of birds like eastern towhees that you see again in that leaf layer, but you don't see them at the feeders a lot. You'll see them at your feeders. You'll see that you're going to see this flicker coming up pretty soon. And the juncos are here. Again, I told you on that first cold day, snowy, rainy day, the juncos will be there in huge flocks. And that's a great hopper feeder right then that have the larger trays on the side to accommodate the larger birds. And you can tell that I'm filming this from inside where I'm nice and warm. And there's a bluebird. In the wintertime, the birds, they look fatter, but they're actually not. They're puffing up their feathers to trap air in the layers of their feathers so that can help keep them warm. There's that flicker again. He's in there chowing down on suet pellets and probably peanuts. You can barely tell that he's a flicker. That's a yellow-rumped warbler fighting there, and there's a pine warbler. Yellow-rumped warblers are here all winter, and they are so territorial. They just fight with each other all winter. They could save so much energy if they could just learn to get along. But there's a beautiful bluebird again, all puffed up, and that's a bird bath heater. And we're going to talk about water here in a minute. Bird houses, they will use them in the wintertime to get out of this type of weather. There's a pine warbler, and to hide from predators. Another beautiful bluebird. And then the cardinals, and you know, on a good snow day, and again, knock wood that we get us a good snow day this year, spread the seed on the snow. Make sure there's my husband Jay, there's a yellow rump warbler, but make sure that you're replenishing your feeders a lot so that they the seed doesn't get buried by the snow. Oh, there's a towhee right there. Beautiful birds, eastern towhee. Oh, there's Peppy. Oh my goodness. Haven't seen Peppy in years. But again, there's a bird bath that has the bird bath heater in there. And the bird bath heaters are only inside of my house. The bird bath heaters are only coming on when the temperature gets below 35 degrees. So it's not running all the time. There's the warblers, he's picking out the mealworms and the peanuts that are in there. So just a nice snowy scene. And there's my little bubbling pond as well. You're going to see that again here in a minute. So, all right, let's go back to my presentation. So winter wonderland, and then keeping squirrels off the feeders, that goes year round. Using a baffle is the best way to keep them off the feeders. There are also squirrel-proof feeders called Squirrel Busters, which we highly recommend. You can get them in any good bird stores. You can get them online. I think you can even get them at Lowe's. But using a squirrel baffle will allow you to use a larger variety of birds. Feeders, the platform feeders and tube feeders, hopper feeders. And it's just important that the pole that you've got the baffle on is 10 feet away from anything that a squirrel can use to jump from. And here's proof that they work. This is a squirrel going up to try to get around this baffle. And of course, again, this is in the winter time. But that's a pretty isolated feeder, and he can't. That's a peony bush right next to him. My grandmother's peonies, and so he can't use that. It's too flimsy, and he just can't get around that baffle. Not that he doesn't try, but he does not get around. You can see him stick his little hand trying to get by there. Darn it all, foiled again. All right, so in the winter, like I say, a variety of food: suet, seed, fruit, worms, a variety of food, and concentrate on quality seed. Make sure that it's a good seed. It hasn't been sitting in a warehouse, and it's not meant for California birds. Protein, suet, mealworms, both. Peanuts are also high in protein. Sunflower chips, just the heart of the sunflower is high in protein. A lot of birds that are insect eaters, like warblers, like bluebirds, their beaks are softer because they're not meant to crack shells. They're meant to eat insects. And so they can't get to the meat of the sunflower unless you provide just the shelled sunflower. Also think about orioles. They're becoming much more common here. I still won't call them common, but they are much less rare. Let's call it that. And the hummingbirds are also here in the wintertime, some of them. So make sure that you are putting out fresh nectar for both of those, and jelly and oranges. And I don't have pictures of orioles in my yard because I never got one. But I know someone, Rachel in Hawk, one of our fabulous volunteers, she regularly has dozens of them every year. And she's already got them back. And I say, if you want to see if you've got an oriole, they are triggered by the color orange, very similar to how a hummingbird is triggered by red. So if you just take buy an orange, it's a cheap way to try to buy an orange at the store, cut it in half and put it out there and see if you get any takers. If the orioles come, they're going to need more than oranges, though. They're going to need protein. So worms and sunflower chips and suet, but they love nectar. So it's instead of 4-to-1, 4 parts water, 1 part sugar, like the hummingbird have, it's 5 parts water and 1 part sugar. And you can buy an oriole feeder. They need a little bit larger feeder. So, and then water. Water is important, as I said already. even in cold temperatures. They're going to need water. And you can buy a bird bath heater. See, how guilty do I feel that my bird bath heater's not out there? But here's a mourning dove that I thought I was going to have to fish out of that water, but getting a drink of water on a really cold day. Here's another snow day. And here's a robin on that snow day, taking a bath just like he needs to keep himself clean. So, so you can buy bird bath heaters. And again, that will only come on when the temperatures get below 35. You can buy heated bird baths, which is kind of like a bowl that has the heating element embedded into it. Both of those need to be plugged in. We have not found a bird bath heater that works on solar in the wintertime. They don't work. They don't work well. And then also garden ponds. So here's an example of a fountain that works really well in the summertime, but it doesn't, the picture on the right, it does not work well in the wintertime. Those tubes froze. So just moving water will not keep it from freezing. But if you can put a little garden pond out there, it is, put a little bubbler in it to keep the water moving. That's ideal. Making it shallow enough. That's another thing that's really important. Making it shallow enough, having shelves so that the smaller birds can use it. You also want to be thinking about if something gets in there, making sure they have an escape route out, putting a stick or a log so that they can climb out. Or in this case, on the right, you've got all those lily pads they can crawl onto and get out of there. So you want to make sure that it's shallow enough that they can use it. But there's an example of a heated bird bowl. But you want to make sure that all of this is shallow enough. And if you've got a new bird bath and the birds aren't using it, put a rock in the middle of it. That'll give them a comfort level that if they get in, they can get out. And once you've got some activity, a few birds coming and going, then you'll be home free. But a lot of people complain that on a new bird bath, the birds won't use it. So, and then this is the fifth thing. So you're stuck at home, you're a gardener, you can't go outside and plant in January. What are you going to do? You're going to read some good books to tell you as soon as you can what you should start planting. And as everybody knows, we are huge fans of Doug Tallamy and his books. Bringing Nature Home was life-changing for me again. And then his follow-up book, Nature's Best Hope, I think was even better than Bringing Nature Home. And he's just come out with a new book called The Nature of Oaks. And he goes through every month of the year and he tells you what that oak tree is, what ecosystem service that oak tree is performing in your yard. And it's just fascinating. Who knew that one oak tree could be that important? And then our buddy at the National Wildlife Federation, Dave Mizejewski, has a great book on plants that you can plant and other elements that you can put in your yard to attract birds, butterflies, and other backyard wildlife. So we recommend all of these books so that you can sit inside by the fire and plan what you're going to do next year to increase the value to wildlife of your backyard. And Daniel, I hope everybody isn't asleep, but now's time for questions. We've got them.
Yeah, there's no possible way anyone fell asleep on that. That was fantastic. Boy, those the videos of all the birds, all the colors was great. I really appreciate that, Carol. Thank you so much. You know, you had mentioned some of the things that we can do. One of the questions had come up about owls and owl boxes being this time of the year. This is the season to get owl boxes up in the trees, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the owl mating territory battles are going to start in earnest in December. It's a little bit too early yet. And so we recommend if you're going to put a barred owls So there's 3 bird owls basically in the area. 4. I mean, barn owls, there's really, I'm not sure there's been a sighting of a barn, B-A-R-N owl in Mecklenburg County for a while. They're in surrounding counties and out there where there's barns still. And then there's screech owls. They're in wooded areas, but I'm not sure in the greater Charlotte area that you're going to have a screech owl. They're much smaller birds, but they're cavity nesters. And barn owls are cavity nesters. Then there's the great horned owl, who's king of the jungle here. A great horned will rule over a barred owl. So if you have a great horned owl, you probably don't have any other owls in your backyard. And they are open nesters. So they will take over like an old hawk's nest. And they will add some sticks to it and, kind of in a crotch of a tree. And the barred, B-A-R-R-E-D owl is the most prolific here. And they're the ones that have the cool, who cooks for you, and they sound like monkeys out there when they're at the height of their mating, or when they've got when they're talking to their young. So the barred owls are the most common owls here. They're most well adapted to living with humans, and they will take readily to a nesting box. They are cavity nesters, and so they are depending on but they can't build their own cavity, so they're depending on our either already naturally occurring cavities or an old woodpecker hole, like a pileated woodpecker, or they will take to a man-made cavity in the form of a nesting box. We recommend that you don't put up your owl box too soon. We say install them sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas, because if you put them up too soon, they become squirrel boxes. The squirrels have a fall litter, and the fall litter is going on right now. So if you have an existing barred owl house, let the squirrels do their thing. I had a customer call me yesterday and say, there's squirrels coming and going. I'm like, let them go through their thing. And then right around Thanksgiving, go and clean the box, put in some fresh shavings, and hope you get hope the owl.
Oh, it sounds like your internet just
neighbors territory, and then mating will start.
It seems like your audio just glitched for just a moment there, Carol. Now you're back.
Hang on a second. Let me do this. Let me stop and let me come back over to Zoom so you can see me. So where did you leave me? So the territory fights start in December, matings in January. So make sure your box is up somewhere right around Thanksgiving towards Christmas.
That is right. That is right. We've had a lot of folks giving you big props on this beautiful presentation. We've got a good bunch of questions, so do bear with us, and I'd love to get through quite a number of these because there's some really great questions. One of them was in one of the videos. There was a wooden feeder with V notches on the side, little round hole. What kind of feeder was that, and what type of food was inside?
So that was a woodpecker feeder, and it is the little notches on the side were for gripping for their claws, their feet, and then also because it was oblong, it also served as a tail prop for the woodpecker. And then in the feed that was inside there was a protein-rich food. And it also had some berries. So there was, it was peanuts, little suet pellets. So they're little, they're about the size of a pea, and they're suet, they're little round balls. And then there was some cran raisins, dried cranberries were in there. And then sunflower chips, again, just the heart of the sunflower. So it's very protein rich. Woodpeckers, they're almost exclusively insects and berries, and so trying to mimic that as much as possible will get woodpeckers in.
Excellent. Another question was, how do we keep live mealworms from crawling away?
So you want to put them in a feeder that is deep enough with steep sides that they can't crawl out. So, you know, you can put them in a old ashtray. I don't even know if people have ashtrays anymore, but an old ashtray would be perfect for it. Just some little dish, and you want to make sure that the dish is sturdy enough that when the bird perches on the side of it, they don't flip it over. If you use like plastic, a lot of times they'll flip those over. So glass is ideal, and just steep on the side so they can't climb out.
Very good. Is there something you can talk about keeping birds from flying into windows? You know, you showed a couple of beautiful suction cupped window feeders, which are fantastic. Obviously, it needs to be a good quality item because we all know those cheap suction cups will stick just long enough for you to just about get to enjoy them, and that's when they fall. So a high quality suction cup, but you showed a couple of those that were clearly doing very well.
Yeah. So, and actually a window feeder will help with window strikes because the activity coming and going, and something on the window signals that this is not a hole. And what's happening is they are seeing the reflection of this sky, the glass. That's a hole. So they think they can fly through it, and they're hitting it at a pretty high rate of speed. And sometimes it kills them. Sometimes, fortunately, it just stuns them. So any sort of obstruction you can put there to say this is not a hole. This is not a hole. So there's stickers that you can buy, and they're not obnoxious. They're not like bright. They're almost transparent, but they have a substance in there that the birds vision is different from ours. So we don't see them as much as the birds do. They really light up with the UV rays from a bird. So so the birds, it appears much more bright than it appears to us. If you have a feeder near your window, let's say you've got one 12 feet away and you're having window strike issues, a hawk will come through and spook the bird and they fly away. The best thing to do, and this sounds counterintuitive, but the best thing to do is move that feeder system closer to the window, because when that hawk comes through and spooks them, if they've got 15 feet, they can get up a pretty big head of speed, to hit that window, and it'll hurt them. But if they're 3 feet away, they'll just glance right off of it and keep right on going. It won't slow them down at all. So so it sounds counterintuitive, but moving it closer sometime. And then, like I say, the window feeders really do help say this is not a hole. We have, I don't know if John Robbins is on the call, but he was using soap. He took a bar of soap and he drew lines on his window glass. So, in kind of a grid pattern to say, this is not a hole. I think that's something you have to keep repeating, because eventually it will be, the rain and water will rinse it off. But I thought that was a really cheap solution to doing it, using soap. Or you could also, I guess you could use like a highlighter marker, something that on the window that will again indicate this is not a hole you can fly through.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it is unfortunate when you're trying to do right by them, you attract them, and then you're injuring them. So
yeah.
I remember seeing, we were talking a little earlier, Nicole was talking about her spiders, but if you can encourage a writing spider, they definitely see that little Shazam mark in a writing spider's web, because no one wants to get in that net, in that web. Not us, definitely nothing. And the spider doesn't want you to break their web. So those kind of clings as well. All sorts. Yeah, there's all sorts of things. Another question we get a lot of is in the spring, why are the birds pecking on my windows and they're driving me crazy and they're pooping on my windowsill and they're fighting with their reflection. And so just trying to take that reflection away somehow, either with paper or put some soap and water in a spray bottle and spray it on the window. And again, it creates a film so they can't see their reflection. That's another way. You know, we were talking about mealworms a little earlier. Question about, can you feed dried mealworms to the bluebirds in the winter?
You can. It is, they will eat them if they don't have any choice. And in the spring, we really encourage people to go, if you're going to go worms, do the live mealworms, because the baby chicks are in that house, and they can't like fly out and go get themselves a drink of water. The only water that they're getting, the only moisture, is in the juicy insects that the parents are bringing. So we really encourage you to go live mealworms. I know it's creepy. You're keeping them in your refrigerator. They're moving around when you put them out there, but in the spring, really do the live. But in the wintertime, if you don't want to worry, deal with the live, dry would be okay.
Great. Another question about pecan trees, depending on where you're from.
Yes.
That she has a pecan tree in her yard. What can she do with the fallen pecans if they don't eat them?
Oh, wow. I would just leave them. I mean, that's what nature would do, is leave them on the ground, let the squirrels come and collect them, and other critters will eat them as well. I know pig farmers would love them. If she wants to collect them and give them to some pig farmers, they would eat them up. But I would leave them. And if you don't, if it's unsightly and you don't want to, again, I would say rake them up in an area and just leave them out there. But I'd leave them out there and let the critters have them, birds and everybody.
If I remember correctly, did Carolina Waterfowl Rescue, were they accepting, you might want to go and check out their website. They were accepting various acorns and various, tree nuts. So they might be interested in a nice bushel of pecan, pretty fresh pecans to feed all the little creatures that they're saving. They rescue some pretty small ones and big ones over there nowadays, not just ducks and geese and stuff. So
yeah, that's a great point too. Yeah, so it's a great source of food.
Yeah, indeed. One of the other questions we've got here is that Beth gets dozens and dozens of brown-headed cowbirds and starlings. Is there a way to discourage them while feeding their other birds?
Brown-headed cowbirds love millet and cracked corn. So if you are feeding in your feeders millet or cracked corn, I would stop, because that might be what is attracting them. And they're usually seasonal, and the starlings are usually seasonal. Starlings, when they've got babies in the spring, they will come and wipe out a whole brick of suet in a day. Well, sometimes half a day. And there are feeders that you can get to put suet in. They're starling proof feeders. So the bluebirds can get through, and smaller birds can get through, but anything larger than a bluebird can't. And the starling's bigger than a bluebird. We also have upside down suet feeders. So there's a roof on the top, and the suet is facing down, and starlings aren't good at clinging and eating upside down, so they can't eat it. But woodpeckers are good at clinging and eating upside down, so they can enjoy the suet. But the brown-headed cowbirds, more than likely it is because you're feeding either millet or cracked corn or both. And there's in the wintertime, because there are so many ground feeding birds here, like the juncos and the white-throated sparrows that I was talking about, there is a blend that is meant to spread on the ground. And it does have millet and cracked corn, because juncos and sparrows love millet and cracked corn. But I wouldn't put it in a feeder. They won't come to a feeder, and the brown-headed cowbirds will.
That's fantastic. Carol, you got a lot of thank you. Always great to learn great wildlife info from Carol. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. I told you guys we were in for a treat today. and it was true. You know, there was one last question, so get your last questions in if you've got any. This one is asking about predator baffles, as well as you showed a video of the squirrel not making it into the feeder, but that those can also serve as predator baffles for your birdhouses and things like that.
Yes. Yeah. So squirrels, raccoons they're always, that baby birds must be delicious because everybody's trying to eat them. So that will keep those off. I will hesitate to say that there's anything will keep a snake off of a birdhouse. I mean, we know of instances where snakes will go right around those types of baffles. And I say snakes, they got to eat too. But the baffles, you're right, they will help keep your baby birds safe. And then also, you know, when you're looking at, oh, you know what, we didn't talk about roosting boxes, but when we look at bird houses, the predator guard on the front of it, just that square piece of wood that's covering the hole, that keeps other birds from eating the baby bird. So I hate to tell y'all, but blue jays are reaching in there and grabbing baby birds. Red belly woodpeckers are reaching in there and grabbing baby birds. And so everybody, like I've said it 100 times, you know, in the thriving ecosystem, everybody's eating everybody else. So it's just important that you understand that going in, and sometimes it's hard to watch, but and you want to give everybody the best chance with good quality products and birdhouses, and then you've got to kind of let go too.
Indeed. Donna from our sister chapter, the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, mentions that Carolina Wildlife Conservation Center in Iron Station does need acorns and nuts as well. So, Nicole, that's also another opportunity for a great group to go ahead and use your acorns and pecans and whatnot. Well, I tell you, Carol, thank you so much. This is why I enjoy having you as part of Hawk, as well as just a tremendous resource for National Wildlife Federation, as well as North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Thank you again. And stay tuned for a surprise presentation next month. And I look forward to sharing that information with all of you. Thanks for attending tonight, and you all have a wonderful evening. Take care, everybody. See you next month.
Bye. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
Bye.